Hello and welcome to another episode of Nathan Builds Robots. Today we're going to be covering breaking news in the 3D printing industry. So the headline topic of the day is Stratasys is suing Bambu Lab over alleged patent infringement. And they've issued a warning to Bambu Lab that they are infringing their technologies, and they're probably wanting some sort of settlement or injunction, which would take the form of Bambu Lab paying Stratasys for the use of their technologies, or completely blocking the import of Bambu Lab printers that are using the alleged infringing technologies. We also have some news out of PRUSA Research with the announcement of their MK4S. They've tacked on some nice improvements to the MK4 that should make it a better printer overall. Today's video is sponsored by Squarespace, and I'll tell you a little more about them later, but let's get into our first headline topic, and that is the lawsuit between Stratasys and Bambu Lab. I want to preface all this discussion by stating that I am not a legal professional. None of this is legal advice, but these are my observations as to what's going on and my general knowledge about Stratasys and Bambu Lab. Bambu Lab is pretty much a household name for anyone that does hobby or at-home 3D printing. They have machines like the A1 Mini, the A1, the X1C, the P1P, and P1S, and along with their 3D printers, they sell accessories that allow you to print with multiple colors, such as the AMS and AMS Lite. But something a lot of you might not realize is how big of a company Bambu Lab is. Some reports estimate that they've sold as much as $200 million in revenue in 2023, and in the current year, 2024, they'll undoubtedly surpass that number, so they might have sales as much as $500 million. This represents a tremendously valuable company, and they might actually be the largest 3D printing company in the world by market value. I've gathered information from anonymous sources saying that their newest 3D printer will be a multi-tool head color-changing printer that should be coming out around November of 2024, and they've raised as much as $600 million in venture capital funding. So this company is obviously worth north of $1 billion. It's a very valuable company. Now, I can't speak to the quality of Bambu Lab machines. Some people say they're pretty good, but I wouldn't know because I'm not on their affiliate program. And I definitely don't have any links in the description that you can click to check them out. The plaintiff in this patent infringement lawsuit is Stratasys. Now, Stratasys might not be a household name for a lot of you that have gotten into 3D printing lately, but if you go way back with 3D printing like I do, then you'll undoubtedly recognize the name. Scott Crump patented the original FDM process, and with that patent, he was able to build out the company that we know as Stratasys today. The original patent on the FDM process has expired. However, they maintain a catalog of about 2,500 patents related to all different aspects of the 3D printing process, which means they maintain rights to that technology and can sue other people and other companies that are making use of it without properly licensing it from them. Stratasys also owns stakes in a lot of other 3D printing companies. So the best way to think of Stratasys as it's this gigantic conglomerate of a bunch of different companies. They're an international organization with offices all around the world, and they generally sell more expensive machines. They're not really in the hobby market the same way that your Crealities, your PRUSAs, and your Bambu Labs are. Now you might be wondering, why is Stratasys raising this lawsuit against Bambu Lab now all of a sudden? Well, if you read the legal filings, you'll see that Stratasys states that Bambu Lab has irreparably damaged their company through patent infringement. Basically, Bambu Lab has stolen a bunch of market share from customers and companies that used to buy exclusively from Stratasys. One of the most important products in the Bambu Lab lineup when it comes to their corporate clients is the Bambu Lab X1E. This is basically a Bambu Lab X1C, and it has important features like a little switch to disable the Wi-Fi. Wi-Fi capabilities on 3D printers is kind of a big deal when you're dealing with any type of secretive development or IT departments that want to maintain cybersecurity over all the devices that are connected to the network. But this is the machine that's really going after those MakerBot and Ultimaker sales. And you could even imagine this machine replacing a lot of sales that would have been given over to Stratasys originally. So let's say Stratasys is selling a customer a $200,000 3D printer, but instead they're like, you know what, actually we're just going to buy a couple Bambu Lab X1Es instead. Well, that represents a huge loss in profits for Stratasys. If you look at companies like Creality, Anycubic, Elegoo, I mean, sure, someone might buy an Ender 3 to use at their company, but it's not going to be replacing your high-end enterprise-grade machines the same way that a Bambu Lab X1E could replace one of those enterprise-grade machines. Now that you've got Bambu Lab entering the scene with their X1E, presenting a real existential threat to the Stratasys company, at least for certain printers in their 3D printer catalog, they're starting to rethink the equation of, is it worth it to do a lawsuit or should we just let it slide? Another reason why Stratasys might be suing Bambu Lab is the fact that Bambu Lab has their own patents. PRUSA and Creality both have large contributions to open source, and they generally don't patent things as much. However, Bambu Lab, as soon as they hit the scene, they were starting to patent things. Now, a lot of people have this misconception that Bambu Lab is this small company started in Dr. Tao's garage with like 5 guys just working over soldering irons building these printers out. But I really don't think that's the case. This company had hundreds of employees and built hundreds of prototypes before they launched the X1C on Kickstarter. This isn't some grassroots company that was founded out of the 3D printing community. This is a large company that, according to the lawsuit filings that Stratasys has written, has ties with other legacy 3D printer manufacturers. And something that I've always found kind of curious is in Bambu Lab's patent filings and on some of their paperwork, they claim to be the Shenzhen Tuzhou Company, CO Ltd. And in these lawsuit filings, they're being referenced as a conglomerate of a bunch of different companies by Stratasys. So it might be tempting to empathize with Bambu Lab and be like, oh, it's just this tiny little startup that's trying to produce cool printers for everyone. But really, these are 2 large corporate conglomerates going head-to-head in a legal battle. If I were Bambu Lab, I would have kind of expected something like this to happen at some point. Anyone that follows Bambu Lab closely knows that they make these blog posts every once in a while that say a lot of things about what's going on at the company. Well, they might stop doing that now because the text in those blog posts is being quoted in the lawsuits. In this patent infringement case, Stratasys is suing for damages and possibly an injunction, which would be a legal order to stop Bambu Lab from infringing on their patents. Now, how can Bambu Lab stop from infringing on these patents? Well, they could redesign their printers in such a way that they skirt the boundaries of Stratasys' patents. However, like I said earlier, Stratasys has an enormous catalog of patents. It's really hard to work around what they have out there. And frankly, to even read all of the patents that they have would take months. So what Stratasys is more likely to be attempting here is to either block them for sale in the US market with an injunction. So some possible solutions here is that Stratasys might want Bambu Lab to license their technology and pay them, basically take a cut for every printer sold. Bambu Lab is earning enough money at this point where they could probably do that without completely bankrupting themselves. Stratasys might also want to buy a portion of the Bambu Lab company. So let's say, hey, you can use our patents as long as we get a 45% share of the Bambu Lab company. So there's a lot of potential solutions to this lawsuit. Likewise, Bambu Lab could fire back and say, you know what, we're not going to take this. I think your patents are BS. We're going to prove that there's prior art on this stuff or that it's obvious, and we're going to get your patents nullified. This is much less likely to happen. Just based on what I've read, the way that most patent lawsuits are resolved, it's really difficult to get patents taken away from other people, especially from a company like Stratasys, who has probably a team of dozens or hundreds of lawyers that are expertly crafting these lawsuits and their patents in a way that they're not easy to just get stricken down. One way or another, Bambu Lab is going to have to pay up, and I'm not sure what this means for them. I'm not sure what kind of settlement they'll be able to reach, but it'll certainly be exciting to follow and watch. Also, what does this mean for other 3D printing companies like Creality and PRUSA? It seems like they're not really the target of this lawsuit. It could be that they haven't assessed that those companies have done enough damage to the Stratasys company to be worth filing a lawsuit. These patent filings might put the future of the 3D printing hobby at stake, but one thing that'll still be here, even if 3D printing fails, is today's sponsor, Squarespace. When the time came for me to start my own website, I investigated a couple other options, but Squarespace was really the easiest one to get started with, and they're always adding new tools and features to help you get the most out of your website. That's one of the things I really like about Squarespace. They're always adding additional tools and features to make your website publishing experience as easy as possible. If you want to get started with your own free trial of a Squarespace website, go to squarespace.com. You can build up your website exactly how you like it, and with all these additional tools, it really helps bring your creative vision to life. Once you've built out your website, and if you think you really like it and want to launch it, go to squarespace.com/NathanBuildsRobots for 10% off your first website or domain purchase. Thanks to Squarespace for sponsoring today's video. Now let's get back to the news. Okay, let's get into the actual patents that are covered. Apparently Stratasys has a patent on purge towers, which is when you're basically printing out your extra material into a waste object so that when you go back to printing your multicolor or multi-material model, you don't have this kind of blend of the two different materials that you're printing with. They also have a patent on flexible print beds that are using a coating to promote adhesion during the printing process, but promote separation once the printing process is complete. Now, specifically, this patent says for a non-film based coating or a non-tape based coating. We've seen flexible spring steel print beds from PRUSA from way back, and other companies have adopted that technology. However, the patent specifies that it has to be a non-tape based coating. So that means that if you just take a piece of spring steel and you apply a film or tape to the top that's just an adhesive backed thing, then you take that off and you flex it and the print pops off, that wouldn't be covered by this patent. However, if you were to spray paint it or coat it or powder coat it or some kind of non-tape based coating, then that would be covered under this patent. Now, personally, I think this one is kind of on tenuous grounds. It's pretty obvious to think that, hey, if we can apply a piece of tape that we can use to break something free, then we could also just paint it directly onto the material. The only reason you were using tape initially is because that's a low-cost process. You can just buy a tape and stick it on there. But I think it's pretty dang obvious to just say, hey, let's spray a coating on there, and that's what we're going to use for promoting the part adhesion and release. And that's kind of the issue that I have with patents in general. A lot of the times it just takes a look at what's publicly available in the public domain and things that people have done, and they just draw an outline around that and be like, hey, you can't develop this any further because then it's infringing our patent. You can see some technologies have a trajectory, and it's pretty obvious what's going to come next. And if you draw a patent outline around that, then it just stops the advancement of that technology instead of promoting technological development, which is the argument that a lot of people have for patents in the first place. Now, there's another patent that talks about what could best be described as a gap fill slicing method. So they're saying they draw a bunch of perimeters or roads, as they like to call them in the Stratasys filing documents. When you're laying down those beads of filament, they call them roads, and those roads have a certain width. So when you draw a shape and then you need to go back and fill in a small gap that's left behind, they have a patent that covers that sort of process. So as far as I know, all slicers use something to that extent. The really kind of scary thing here is that Cura is owned by Ultimaker, which Stratasys has a large stake in. Probably the most terrifying outcome of this whole patent debacle could be that we'll all be forced to use Cura in the future. Now, it's kind of weird because Ultimaker is open source, so it's like they've implemented these patented methods in an open source software, so how does that all work out? It gets really confusing. And on the topic of slicers, one of the most despicable things that I think Bambu Lab have done is they made their own branch of PRUSA Slicer. So basically the entire Bambu studio is based on PRUSA Slicer. But if you notice when you install it and run it on your computer, there'll be a little pop-up with a little loading bar that's like, boop. The first time you run it, it installs this third-party plugin, which is basically not optional to install if you want to use any network functions for your 3D printer. But that's closed source. So I just think it's just really kind of a shady way to get around releasing and using open source software. Yeah, lots of drama going on there with the slicers. Let's also talk about some of the other patents. We got a couple more here that I want to touch on. So there's the load cell based calibration. Basically, Stratasys filed for a patent covering the process of using a sensor on the nozzle to detect the force of certain printing operations. A lot of the Bambu Lab printers use a load cell on the print head to be able to do calibration for themselves. Now, the PRUSA MK4 and some printers from Creality also use this approach of having a load cell in the nozzle. So do the AnchorMake line of printers. So this is a technology that a lot of companies are using, just like the previous ones. I mean, all this stuff is commonplace in 3D printing nowadays. So now having Stratasys come to court and be like, hey, we want these things removed from other people's products is a little bit scary, because it might be throwing us back into the 3D printer dark ages when we didn't really have any printers that were that good. Unless you wanted to pay $200,000 for a Stratasys machine, then by all means you could go ahead and do that. In a separate filing, Stratasys also comes after Bambu Lab with regards to patent infringement on having a network-connected 3D printer. So just the entire idea of having a 3D printer connected to a wireless network and some of the interfaces between the printer and other devices on the network, that's patented by Stratasys. And also RFID tags for material detection. That is also patented by Stratasys. So whenever you buy a spool of Bambu Lab filament, there's a little RFID tag in there. And if you load it into an AMS machine, then it detects what material it is, and that feeds information back into your slicer. So apparently that process of the machine using an RFID tag to feed material information back into the slicer, that is also patented. Now, a lot of you might be like, these patents, they're all bullshit. Well, the thing is, a lot of these patents were filed 10 to 15 years ago when nobody really knew what a 3D printer was. Like, my first experience with a 3D printer was about 12 years ago. And before that, I've only ever heard of them in the news and didn't really know anything about the technology. So there's going to be a lot of BS claims where people are going to be like, oh, that technology was already around and I would have came up with that. No, Stratasys, a lot of these patents were filed before anyone really knew what a 3D printer was. So it might be tempting to say, yeah, that was obvious, but really at the time, it might not have been obvious. I think there's issues with the patent system in general. Just the fact that you get a 20-year monopoly on a technology for writing it down first, I think that's kind of BS. And especially a lot of these technologies, they would have progressed on their own in the absence of a patent system. So the fact that a patent system is getting involved and allowing large companies to sue each other is just kind of, I guess, disappointing and a little disheartening to like the smaller companies out there. Like, let's say I wanted to start a 3D printing company. If I were to be massively successful, like Bambu Lab is, then you start having to deal with lawsuits where they're coming after you for a chunk of your company or massive amounts of payment or just wanting to completely block you from doing business at all. Especially since a lot of these technologies, like, your network connected 3D printer, I have a 2D printer that's connected to a network, and I kind of think that was a rather obvious thing to implement. Just because you add the prefix 3D to a patent, now a technology like a network-connected 2D printer, that would be considered obvious and I'd probably never get a patent for it. But if I'm having a network-connected 3D printer, now it's completely different and it's like, whoa, this is amazing technology. But it also raises the question of what's going to happen to all these other companies, all these other open source projects, which is allegedly using all of these things that Stratasys has patents for and is apparently willing to sue people over. Are we just going to go back to using really basic printers that don't have purge towers, no PEI coated spring steel sheets, no gap fill in your slicers, so all of our prints are just going to be crappier, no load cell based calibrations, no network connections, no RFID tags for material detection? Now, there are people on Reddit and in various comments across the internet that are saying the East District Court of Texas, basically the court that Stratasys is using to file this lawsuit, is apparently very patent happy. A majority of all patent cases in the entire United States are filed at this one court because they're so favorable to patent holders. So it doesn't bode well for Bambu Lab being able to just shrug off this lawsuit. They're going to have to address it one way or another. They're going to have to hire a legal team and look at all their options and probably come to some sort of settlement with Stratasys. I guess we'll see how all that works out. Interestingly, the way that things are worded in the court filings, Bambu Lab is inducing patent infringement such that all Bambu Lab users and Bambu Lab affiliates are also infringing on Stratasys' patents. They're probably not going to go after individual users. They're just saying that, hey, basically everyone who's bought one of these machines and is using these technologies that we own, they are infringing our patents, and Bambu Lab has induced them to infringe our patents. So it's just kind of interesting and funny. I doubt any major legal action will come of it, but the way that it's worded, you, the Bambu Lab user, are also infringing on Stratasys' patents. I want to keep this conversation going in the comments, so if you guys have any additional information that you'd like to bring to the table or have discovered things that you'd like me to talk about with regards to this lawsuit, let me know in the comments down below. I'd love to hear about what your takes are. There's all sorts of legal professionals and people who have been around in the industry for a while that share all their stories, and that's one of the things I really like about my YouTube comments section. Alright, let's talk about some other stuff in 3D printing news. As of today, filming this episode, PRUSA just announced their MK4S upgrade kit and MK4S printer. Basically, for about $100, you can get a couple upgraded parts that you can attach to your MK4. Now, I have an MK4, PRUSA sent one over for me for testing and evaluation. I also bought an MMU3, and I printed out a bunch of these little guys, the multicolor capabilities of the MK4. So, I'm pretty happy with that setup. I've done a lot of printing with it, and I think it's pretty nice. Now, this MK4S will just be a couple of light upgrades that they've added to that printer. It's got a pretty decent motion system. It's nice and fast and pretty compact, and it's just a nice little bed slinger. It looks like the MK4S upgrade is at no additional cost, so it's the same price as the MK4, and with that you get some really cool upgrades here. So you got a better part cooling setup. It's a larger fan that can blow more air onto your part. That'll give you better overhang performance and allow higher print speeds where you don't have to worry about the melted filament staying too soggy or molten. Also, they're including a CHT type nozzle system. The flow will be split up into multiple channels, which will allow things to melt faster and allow for higher flow rates. Additionally, they now have an app that you can download, and that will allow you to do some network functionalities with this printer. They've improved the experience of getting your printer on the network. The old system was kind of outdated in my opinion. You had to plug in a flash drive and type in your network information, then put it in the printer, and then it connects to your network. But now a lot of that has been automated, and apparently you can just use NFC to tap your phone to the printer and get it on the Wi-Fi network that way, which should be a much better user experience for people that want to do network printing. They've also announced a type of hacker board or GPIO board, which will allow you to plug this little breakout board into the 3D printer and give you a bunch of additional outputs for controlling more steppers and sensors and additional actuators. So basically they're leaning into this whole idea of being able to modify the printer to do things that are beyond the scope of the original printer. I think this is a great thing to do. People who want to modify and upgrade their printers are often limited by the input and output options that you have on your 3D printers, but providing this little chip that allows you to add additional things to your printer will really unlock the ability for people who want to do modifications and hacking and all sorts of crazy stuff to do that in an easy way. This is in stark contrast to what you get from Bambu Lab, who basically sells you a printer and sells you all the accessories and doesn't give you much flexibility to modify or change things. I just really like the direction that PRUSA is going with this, and I'm curious to see what people come up with to add additional functions and features to their MK4 printers. You can buy the MK4S right now, and I assume the upgrade kit will be on sale shortly after this, maybe in a couple of weeks from now. So I'll definitely want to try out that MK4S upgrade kit. Apparently it should be pretty easy to install because they're not really changing any of the core architecture of the machine. It's just some upgraded parts that you can throw on there to get some more capability and more speed. This is one of the things that people who enjoy the PRUSA brand really appreciate about the company. You buy a machine once and you can just upgrade it and change it and do all sorts of fun stuff with it. They're still running on their proprietary buddy boards. These are PCBs that they manufacture in-house, and as far as I know, the schematics for those aren't available online. So it is a little bit locked down in that regard, but at least they're still open sourcing a lot of their components and the firmware files, so if you want to make changes to the printer, you can. I don't think it's as flexible as something you'd get from the likes of Voron, where you have full access to all the hardware and you can spec it out however you want and make changes using Clipper, but you still have some upgrade options here, and that's really nice to see. So overall, it's a bunch of welcome upgrades, and if you're planning on buying an MK4 at some point, well, now you have the MK4S, which is more capable with more features, and you just get that instead, so it's just a pure upgrade for no additional cost. Also, in 3D printing upgrade news, we've got the Greenboy 3D pellet extruder. He's just opened that up for pre-orders a couple of weeks ago. If you wanted to run a pellet printer in the past, you'd have to buy a $1,000 or thousands of dollars upgrade kit, but this kit from Greenboy 3D looks like it's going to be the first affordable pellet extruder. The pricing right now, if you want to pre-order one of these, is $389. Honestly, I don't know how he's making it that cheap, because the actual extruder that turns and pushes out the plastic pellets, those are pretty expensive to manufacture because the geometry is so complex and it needs to be made out of high-end materials. So honestly, I'm not even sure how he's producing these for this cheap, but if you want to try it out, there's always an option there. Keep in mind, this is a product that really nobody has tested. I don't know if it's going to work. He's got some good videos of it working, but a lot of times in the translation from a freshly launched product to something that actually works reliably and is easy to use, there might be some hiccups there. So I wouldn't get this if you're planning on having something that works reliably. I'd definitely wait and see how things pan out. But if you're really eager to support his project and get your hands on something that can do pellet extruding for less money, then this might be something to look into. Personally, I'd probably wait a couple iterations before I buy into this. I mean, sure, it might sound like you're getting a good deal by having a discount on something like this, but really the later renditions of this technology will probably be a lot better, and maybe there might be some issues with the first batch that it could be worth supporting this project a little later on. Alright, so that's all the 3D printing news I have for you today. Big thanks to our sponsors and everyone who supports me on Patreon. This really helps keep the channel going and lets me produce all this content that you guys enjoy. So if you can support me on Patreon, I'll leave a link to that in the description below. If you're interested in starting your own website, why not try out Squarespace? There's a free trial you can click on down there. And in general, thanks for watching, you guys, and I'll see you in the next video. Stratasys was the company founded by Scott and Lisa Crump in Eden Prairie, Minnesota, back in 1989. Scott Crump patented the original FDM process, and with that patent, he was able to build out the company that we know as Stratasys today. His original inspiration was the hot glue gun, so a lot of people like to use the analogy of 3D printers being like a hot glue gun, and it just builds up a part layer by layer like that. Well, that's what the founder and original patent holder for the FDM process thought as well. He was actually building toy frogs for his niece using a hot glue gun, and realized the commercial value of that, decided to file a patent, and built a massive company out of it. Other technologies were developed in the late 80s and 1990s around 3D printing, but Scott Crump held the rights to the FDM process, which uses a spool of material and injects plastic layer by layer to form a shape that's usable, and it's mainly used for rapid prototyping. So for the first 10 to 15 years, they were pretty much the only company around that was building FDM printers. But when that patent was starting to expire, a lot of other companies popped up, and even open source projects that we know and love today, like MakerBot, the RepRap project, and a number of other companies. Stratasys currently has headquarters in Eden Prairie, Minnesota, where the company was founded, and also Revolt, Israel. They merged with Objet, which was an Israeli company that mostly focused on inkjet technologies. When the companies merged, they had a combined value of over $1 billion, and the original Stratasys company maintained a 55% stake in the combined company. Objet owned a 45% stake in the combined merged company. Nowadays, Stratasys offers a wide range of products, including those based on the FDM process, SLA, and the ink jetting technology that Objet brought to the company. In 2013, Stratasys acquired the company MakerBot. It originally started out as a company similar to PRUSA, where they were really embracing the open source idea of, hey, let's develop this technology and release it to everyone and produce low-cost machines. Eventually, the open source spirit of the company was kind of co-opted. Pettis basically took leadership of the company and made moves to make it a more closed source system, and was eventually bought out by Stratasys in a deal that was roughly valued at $500 million in company stock. Pettis sold the MakerBot company to Stratasys. Now, if you want to learn more about this exciting and dramatic time in 3D printing history, I'd highly recommend checking out the documentary Printing a Legend, which follows the MakerBot team throughout this process of getting acquired. It was really controversial because a lot of the original founders of the company left right before it was acquired by Stratasys because they were frankly kind of disgusted with what the company was turned into. They left, and then Pettis sold the company, and I'm not sure what happened to those guys' stake in the company when that happened. It seems kind of like they got screwed out of a lot of money. Lots of drama and crazy stuff happening back then. But anyways, the company MakerBot was purchased by Stratasys because they saw them and they were like, wow, you can build this kind of a printer for only $2,000? That's amazing. Let's buy you guys, and then we can sell your printers alongside our larger printers for like educational uses or customers who can't afford the multi-$100,000 machines. About a decade later, the MakerBot division of Stratasys was sold off to Ultimaker. You might be familiar with Ultimaker. They produce the website Thingiverse and also the slicer Cura. They also sell their own line of FDM printers. So this new company that's a combination of Ultimaker and MakerBot is now separate from Stratasys. However, according to the articles that I've read, Stratasys maintains a large minority share in the company, with owning as much as 45% of the company. So while they might be a distinctly separate corporation, since Stratasys still owns a large portion of the company, you might say that it's still kind of Stratasys.